The Story of Prophet Joseph, Episode 7. The Dream That Would Change Egypt Forever. Welcome back to Storyverse. If you're enjoying this journey through the incredible story of Prophet Joseph, don't forget to subscribe, and let's begin. In our last episode, Joseph remained forgotten inside prison. But outside those walls, Allah's plan was already unfolding. One mysterious dream was about to open the door that had remained closed for years. Far above the prison walls, life in the royal palace continued as usual. The king of Egypt ruled one of the greatest civilizations in the world. His kingdom was prosperous, his people respected him, and his advisors surrounded him every day. Yet one night, something happened that no wealth, army, or power could explain. The king awoke suddenly. His heart was racing. The dream he had just seen felt unlike any ordinary dream. It was vivid, it was unsettling, and somehow it felt real. Again and again, the strange images replayed in his mind. He had seen 7 healthy, strong cows peacefully grazing in a field. Without warning, 7 thin, starving cows appeared. They looked weak and exhausted, yet instead of collapsing from hunger, they devoured the 7 healthy cows. The king watched in horror. Then the dream changed. He saw 7 green ears of grain, full of life and ready for harvest. Beside them stood 7 dry, withered ears, lifeless and empty. The dry ears swallowed the healthy ones until nothing remained. The king opened his eyes in fear. He sat upright on his bed, breathing heavily. The palace servants rushed toward his chamber after hearing the sudden noise. They had never seen their ruler so disturbed. "This dream," the king whispered. "It must mean something." As soon as the morning arrived, messengers were sent throughout Egypt. The greatest priests, the wisest scholars, the royal advisors, the kingdom's most respected dream interpreters, all were summoned to the palace. The magnificent royal hall quickly filled with Egypt's greatest minds. Everyone stood silently before the throne. The king slowly described every detail of his dream. No one interrupted. Every face grew more serious as the story unfolded. When he finished speaking, he looked across the room. "I want its meaning." Silence. The scholars exchanged nervous glances. Some lowered their heads, others whispered among themselves. Finally, one advisor stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "these are only confused dreams." Another agreed. "No one can know their meaning." One after another, every interpreter admitted defeat. The greatest experts in Egypt had no answer. The king's disappointment quickly turned into frustration. How could such an extraordinary dream have no explanation? Surely it had not come without purpose. The palace became unusually quiet. No one dared speak. Then, from among the royal servants, one man suddenly froze. A forgotten memory returned with incredible force. His eyes widened. His breathing stopped for a moment. He remembered the prison. He remembered 2 dreams. He remembered a young prisoner whose words had come true exactly as promised. It was the king's cupbearer. Years earlier, Joseph had interpreted his dream while they were imprisoned together. Joseph had told him he would regain his position serving the king, and it had happened exactly as foretold. Before leaving prison, Joseph had made only one request: "Remember me before your king." The cupbearer's face filled with regret. He had forgotten. For years, he had completely forgotten. Now Allah had reminded him at exactly the right moment. He immediately stepped forward and bowed respectfully before the king. "Your Majesty," he said, "if you permit me, I know someone who can explain this dream." The king leaned forward. "You know such a man?" "Yes, he is a prisoner." The royal court looked at one another in surprise. A prisoner? Could someone sitting behind prison walls possess knowledge greater than the kingdom's greatest scholars? The king did not hesitate. "Go, bring me the interpretation." Without wasting another moment, the cupbearer left the palace. His horse raced through the streets of Egypt toward the prison he had not visited in years. Every step reminded him of the promise he had broken. He wondered, would Joseph even speak to him after all this time? The massive prison gates slowly opened. The guards recognized the royal servant and allowed him inside. Nothing had changed. The same stone walls, the same iron doors, the same narrow corridors. But Joseph had changed even less. Years of imprisonment had not hardened his heart. His face still reflected peace. His eyes still carried hope. His faith remained unshaken. When Joseph saw the cupbearer approaching, he greeted him with kindness. There was no anger, no bitterness, no accusation. The cupbearer lowered his head in embarrassment. "I have wronged you," he admitted. "I forgot." Joseph simply smiled. He understood that every event happens only by Allah's permission. There was no place in his heart for revenge. The cupbearer then described the king's dream exactly as it had happened. When he finished speaking, he waited anxiously. Joseph remained silent for a few moments. Then, by Allah's guidance, he began to explain. "The dream carries a warning," Joseph said. "Egypt will experience 7 years of extraordinary abundance. The fields will produce more grain than ever before. The harvests will be rich. The people will enjoy prosperity, unlike anything they have known." The cupbearer's face brightened. But Joseph continued, "After those 7 years, 7 years of severe famine will come. The drought will consume the land. The harvests will fail. The food gathered during the years of abundance will become the people's only source of survival." The room fell silent. Joseph was not simply interpreting symbols. He was describing the future. Then Joseph did something remarkable. The king had asked only for the meaning of the dream, but Joseph offered something far greater. He offered a solution. "You must prepare while there is still time," he explained. "During the 7 years of plenty, let the people harvest as much grain as possible. Store it carefully in its ears to preserve it. Use only what is needed. Save the rest for the years of famine. Then, after those difficult years, Allah will send rain once again. The land will become fertile. The people will press grapes and olives. Prosperity will return." The cupbearer listened in amazement. This was not merely the interpretation of a dream. It was a complete strategy to save an entire nation. He realized that Egypt's future might now depend on the words of the man everyone had forgotten inside a prison. Cupbearer wasted no time. Leaving the prison behind, he hurried back to the royal palace, carrying Joseph's words with him. Every step he took reminded him that the future of Egypt might depend on a man whom the world had forgotten. When he entered the throne room, the king immediately rose from his seat. "Did you find someone who could explain the dream?" he asked. The cupbearer bowed respectfully. "Yes, Your Majesty." Then, before the entire royal court, he repeated every word Joseph had spoken. He described the 7 years of abundance, then the 7 years of devastating famine. Finally, he explained Joseph's plan to store grain during the prosperous years so that Egypt would survive the difficult ones. As the explanation came to an end, silence filled the palace. The king looked around at his advisors. No one spoke. No one objected. Every person in the room understood that this was no ordinary interpretation. It was wisdom. It was leadership. It was a complete plan that could save millions of lives. The king's eyes reflected admiration. "This man," he said quietly, "is no ordinary prisoner." Then he gave an immediate command. "Bring him to me at once." The royal messenger hurried toward the prison, carrying the king's order. For the first time in years, the prison gates were about to open for Joseph. Freedom seemed only moments away, but something happened that surprised everyone. When the messenger announced that the king had ordered his release, Joseph did not rush toward the exit. He did not celebrate. He did not even stand up immediately. Instead, he calmly replied, "Return to your king and ask him about the women who cut their hands. Surely my lord knows well their plot." The messenger was astonished. Who refuses freedom after years in prison? But Joseph understood something greater. He did not want to leave prison while people still believed there was even the slightest doubt about his honor. Freedom without justice was incomplete. His reputation mattered more than his release. He wanted the truth to be known by everyone, not for pride, but because prophets stand upon truth. When the messenger returned and repeated Joseph's words, the king became curious. If this prisoner insisted on an investigation before accepting freedom, there had to be a reason. The king immediately ordered that the women who had attended the banquet years earlier be brought before him. Soon they stood once again in the royal court. Time had passed, but the memory of that extraordinary day had never disappeared. The king asked them, "What happened when you tried to tempt Joseph?" The women lowered their eyes. There was no reason to hide the truth any longer. Together they answered, "Allah knows we found no evil in him." The courtroom fell silent. Then all eyes turned toward one person, the wife of the Aziz. For years she had carried the weight of the secret. She knew this moment could no longer be avoided. Slowly she stepped forward. Her voice was humble. Her pride had disappeared. Before the king, the court, and the people, she finally confessed, "Now the truth has come to light. I was the one who tried to seduce him. And indeed, he is one of the truthful." Her confession echoed through the palace. At that moment, every accusation against Joseph disappeared forever. The innocent servant had become the innocent prisoner, and now the innocent prisoner stood completely vindicated before the entire kingdom. The king was deeply moved. He had never met Joseph, yet he already admired his honesty. A man who preferred prison over sin. A man who refused freedom until justice was served. A man who answered a king's question with wisdom that could save a nation. Such a man could not remain forgotten. The king immediately ordered Joseph to be brought before him with honor. This time, Joseph walked out of the prison not as a criminal, but as a respected and honored guest. The same prison that had once seemed like the end of his story had become the doorway to a new beginning. As Joseph entered the royal palace, years of patience, faith, and trust in Allah had brought him to this very moment. The king welcomed him warmly and spoke with great respect. After listening to Joseph personally, he recognized qualities far greater than intelligence. He saw honesty, he saw wisdom, he saw integrity, he saw a leader. The king declared, "From this day forward, you shall have a position of trust and honor in our kingdom." Joseph had entered Egypt as a slave. He had lived as a servant. He had suffered as a prisoner. Now, by Allah's perfect plan, he stood before the most powerful man in the land with dignity and honor. Every trial had prepared him for this moment. Every hardship had shaped his character. Every delay had carried hidden wisdom. But Joseph's greatest responsibility had not yet begun. A nation was about to face the worst famine in its history. And Allah had chosen Joseph to lead it through the coming years, far away in the land of Canaan. Another family was living peacefully, completely unaware that the famine would soon reach them as well. Very soon, Joseph would come face to face with the very brothers who had once thrown him into a well. Would they recognize him? Would Joseph reveal his identity? And how would Allah finally reunite a father with the son he had mourned for so many years? Those unforgettable answers await us in episode 8, the final chapter of the extraordinary story of Prophet Joseph, where Allah's promise is fulfilled, families are reunited, and the dream of a young boy finally becomes reality.